Hello, and welcome to another episode of Writing Escapades. My name's David Rawding, and on today's episode, I'm going to be reading for you an original short story. So, the short story that I wrote was actually kind of a challenge that my writing group posed. We came up with the idea to write a short work of fiction that would be a campfire story. You know those scary stories that you tell around a campfire? Well, that's what we all did. It's October, it's a scary month, so we each set about to write a campfire story. And then we all got together and we read them around a campfire. So it was pretty appropriate. And for this episode, I'm going to read for you my campfire story. This story is titled The Monster in the Mud. The Monster in the Mud by David Rawding. Durham, New Hampshire, 1735. He should be back by now. Jeremiah Owens peered through the single-pane window at the nearly full moon. The fire in the hearth kept the small homestead warm, but a chill still crawled up Jeremiah's spine. He turned his attention to the dinner table. He'd cleared his plate of salted pork and baked potatoes dutifully, but his wife Rebecca had only henpecked the food on her plate. She put down her fork and chewed her nails. He followed her stare, which aimed at the empty chair across from her. "Quit chewing your nails, my heart," Jeremiah said. She snapped her head around to look at him, and she clutched the table with both hands. Her pale face seemed gaunt, and her short brow was furrowed. "You don't think something nefarious got him on his way home, do you, Jeremiah?" "He'll be along. You know how he loses track of time when he's playing with his friends," Jeremiah said, sweeping over to kiss his wife on the bonnet. "I already have a stern lecture prepared." His wife gave him a quick smile before the fingers on her right hand climbed back towards her mouth. This time she corrected herself and gripped the small wooden cross around her neck with a white-knuckle grip. Her foot took to bouncing on the creaky floorboards of their home. Rebecca wore the same woolen dress and long woolen stockings that she'd worn the last few days. She was practical and her features were plain, but she was anything but ordinary to Jeremiah. She was quick with a prayer and slow to change her ways. Jeremiah appreciated her loyalty to her family, yet, try as he did, he couldn't rid his wife of the nervousness that overtook her when the sun went down. Being that half their lives was lived at night, it was a lot of worry for his wife to handle, and she was a small woman besides. Her being superstitious and living in a cabin in the middle of the woods had always proved a challenge. She hated the way the fog would roll off the bay and hide the terrain, as if demons were hiding behind every tree in the forest. Jeremiah squeezed her narrow shoulders and moved back towards the front window and took up peering into the darkness again. "He'll be along." Jeremiah had lived in the woods beside the brackish waters of Great Bay his entire life, inheriting the cabin from his folks after they passed away from tuberculosis. He and Rebecca had raised their only son, Theodore, on the same floorboards that he'd crawled on. Like Jeremiah, his son Theodore was in love with the woods, the rivers, and the bay, despite the fear his mother tried to imprint on him. Jeremiah's warnings too often fell on deaf ears, as Theodore thought himself invincible, as so many 13-year-old boys often do. He was a capable boy, sure, but he was also afflicted with a wild spirit that was liable to scare his mother half to death. Jeremiah sighed. "We best make ready for bed, my sweet. The boy can look after himself." Jeremiah spoke the words, but they felt hollow. Theo pointed at his husky friend Todd, who had gotten his shoe stuck deep in the mud flat. The tide had receded, exposing Great Bay as what it was, a vast mud pan with a gravel crust, watched over by dense woods that lined the shore. The cold air bit through his sweater, but Theo shook the chill away. "What, are you afraid the crab mother will get you, Todd?" "Yeah, crab mother does like to come out on nights like tonight to feed." Henry's grin flashed from the light of the oil lantern in his hand. Todd stopped struggling to free his boot. "What are you guys talking about?" "Everyone's heard of Crab Mother. You know, she's a horseshoe crab that lives in the mud and is as big as a wagon," Theo added. Henry nodded vigorously and said, "Yeah, and she eats people at night." "You're a bunch of liars and ingrates," Todd's voice took up a whine. I don't know why I let you two convince me to come out here in the first place. He held his hands towards Henry and Theo. Help me get unstuck. I'm cold and this mud won't let my shoes go. Theo was about to keep on badgering Todd, but noted the frown and upturned lip. We've already scared him half to death. Theo clapped a hand on Henry's back. Henry was still chuckling at the struggling Todd, but dutifully set down the lantern to grab one of Todd's arms. Although Theo's feet were on solid gravel, as he pulled, he felt the shifting ground start to absorb his boots a little. With a pop, the mud released its grip on Todd, relieving him of both of his shoes. Todd took a few awkward steps in his woolen stockings. Oh, my dad is going to kill me if I lose those shoes. We can't afford another pair. Henry was bent over laughing. Theo covered his smile. Todd stared at Theo with watery eyes. Help me get them out, Theo, please. Theo rolled his eyes and waded into the mud. He reached down the dark holes and came up with Todd's shoes and tossed them over. Thanks, Theo. Todd worked to get his shoes back on and said, Now can we get out of here? It's creepy out here at night, and it's freezing. Todd shivered. We can't leave yet. I want to play Touch the Tide, Theo said with his hands on his hips. Both Henry and Todd went silent and stared at Theo. What? Don't tell me you two haven't heard of it, Theo said. Henry rubbed his pointed chin. That's a game where you race out through the mud until you touch the incoming tide water. Then you race back, right? That's the game. Theo hooked his thumb to his chest of his wool sweater. Who's gonna race me? Todd looked from Henry to Theo. But the tide's coming back in. What if you get stuck out there? I won't get stuck out there, Theo said. I can move in mud as fast as anyone. I've lived by Great Bay my whole life. Todd shook his head and retreated 2 steps. I'm not going to do it. You two have proper boots. My shoes aren't meant for that kind of thing. You saw. I almost lost them. And I barely even stepped to the mud flat. Sounds like an excuse, Henry said. If you're so brave, why don't you race him, huh, Henry? Todd grinned. I will. Henry put his hands on his hips and puffed out his chest. You stay here and be the judge for when I win. Henry stepped beside Theo and shifted his gaze at the vast stretch of mud. It's a long way, and we're going to get dirty. Theo tightened the laces of his boots. Last chance to change your mind. He caught the moon's reflection off the water, some 200 yards out. Mud doesn't scare me. Just tell me the rules, Henry said, and bent over to tie his bootlaces as well. Rules are simple. Run through the mud until you get to the tide water. You must touch the water. First person to touch the water, then get back to this spot, wins. Easy enough, Henry said, and took up a racing position. Todd put his arm in front of the pair. You both go on 3. 1, 2, 3! Theo's boots left the gravel and met mud. It sucked him down several inches, but he kept his legs pumping, and he moved out deeper. In a dozen yards, the mud came to his calves, and then to his knees. He had to stop to pull his feet out of the black mud, only to have them get stuck on the next step. Theodore eyed Henry, who was up to his thigh in mud. Mom's not going to like how filthy I'll be when I get home. Theo kept moving. He slogged his feet through the cold, dark mud. The filth was up to his waist, and he was practically swimming in the stuff. He felt it grasp him and try to hold him with each step. Theo gave up trying to trudge through, and instead he dove on his belly and began to crawl through the muck, which tried to swallow him. It became a half crawl and half swim through the mire. At nearly halfway to the water, he was out of breath. He spied Henry 10 yards behind him. He had taken to crawling himself. Theo heard Henry's ragged breathing and squelching sounds as he fought his way through the mud. Theo kept crawling and fought the chilled sludge. He felt his energy begin to wane. I can't lose. I'll never hear the end of it. He soldiered on. The mud slapped his face and his hair and soaked through his clothes. Voices came from behind him, but he didn't pay them any mind. He struggled on, diving into the endless mud to reach the tidal waters, lit by stars and moonshine. I'm close. His energy was depleted, but he was nearly there. He humped through the mud and extended his hand. It met icy cold water, and he recoiled it quickly. Theo looked behind him, but Henry wasn't there. He heard Henry and Todd's voices coming from the shoreline, lit by the solitary lamplight. I beat him. Theo wiped a muddy hand through his sweaty hair. The way back suddenly seemed a lot longer. He stopped to catch his breath. I'm exhausted. The cold tidal water reached out and kissed his clothes. The incoming tide was moving faster than he'd thought. A panic shot through him. He pushed out into the mud to head back, and the sucking black mud enveloped him. He fought to stay above it and swim, but he was too tired. His vision became blurry. His pulse beat the side of his head. His limbs and his eyes became heavy, and he gulped air like a fish out of water. Jeremiah woke to pounding on his front door. It took a few seconds to register the knocking was real and not a dream. His wife leapt out of their bed, seemingly fully dressed, as if she hadn't slept a wink. Why would Theodore be knocking? Jeremiah rubbed his bleary eyes and watched his wife move to the door, not bothering to grab a lamp. Jeremiah was hauling up his trousers when Rebecca swung the door open. Rebecca screamed bloody murder. Jeremiah watched his wife reach for a broom. A demon, Jeremiah! A monster at the door! She brandished the broom like an axe and brought it down on something in their doorway. The dark creature wailed something inaudible as Rebecca bludgeoned it on the head with her broom handle. The creature shuddered and collapsed to the ground. Get the musket! I think there's another demon outside! Miss Owens, it's us, Henry and me, Todd! Jeremiah's sluggish feet moved to the door. Rebecca, it's just the boys. Jeremiah took the broom out of Rebecca's hands. Light the lantern. Is this some sort of trick? Did you boys think this was funny? Rebecca pointed at the pale figure of Theodore's friend Todd. The light, woman. I need to see if Henry's okay. Jeremiah leaned down to the mud-caked, unconscious boy on the ground. He brought his ear down to where he thought Henry's mouth was and put his hand on the boy's chest. After a painful moment, he felt the chest move, and hot breath brushed his clean-shaven cheek. Rebecca came with the light and offered it to Jeremiah and said, Todd, why's Henry covered in mud? Were you boys trying to scare us? Jeremiah rubbed Henry's head. The lantern showed spotted blood sprouting from his scalp. Rebecca bent down. Oh, my lord, I'm sorry, Henry. I thought the boy was a devil. He's just passed out, Rebecca. You thumped him hard on the head. We'll bring him inside. I'll tend to him, Rebecca said. One moment. Todd, tell me, where's Theodore? Todd blurted out the words. That's what we were trying to tell you, Mr. Owens, sir. Tears streamed down Todd's cheeks. He sobbed and croaked out, The mud's got him, sir, and the tide's coming in. He's stuck in the mud. Do you know how to find the place where he is, lad? Listen to me. Jeremiah's powerful hands clasped Todd's narrow shoulders. I don't know. Henry knew the way better than me. More tears came with Todd's sobs that cut through the night. Theo's vision was blurry. He'd never been this tired in his life. The more he struggled against the thick mud, the more the cold ooze grasped him. The icy water had sapped any warmth from him. He was on all fours attempting to crawl back to shore, but he barely had enough energy to keep head above the rising water that was up to his chin. Fog had gathered over the bay, and he could hardly make out the shoreline anymore. This isn't how I thought I'd die. He'd heard of people getting trapped by the mud before, but he'd never thought it would be him. He was young and strong. He couldn't sort out how he felt so weak and frail. Like an old man on his deathbed, he almost had nothing left. It took all of his strength to keep his eyes open and his breath moving. Theodore! He heard a voice, or thought he did. His father's voice. He raised his lids for a moment and then closed them. Theo! A different voice, higher in pitch. It sounded like Todd. When Theo opened his mouth to speak, brackish water rushed inside. He choked back and retched water and thrashed to get his mouth above the water again. Theodore! A dim light appeared among the fog. Where are you? As he fought for air, Theo saw the light bobbing and moving like a spirit. He heard the skiff's oarlocks creak and the paddle blades splash. The small, flat-bottomed boat searched. Theodore! Where are you, son? The boat was close, but they couldn't see him. A small wave collided with Theodore's mouth and nose. He swallowed water, and more came. He was too tired to struggle, too tired to fight. He couldn't keep his neck up anymore. His vision went black, and he slumped forward and collapsed his head down into the icy cold water. Jeremiah stepped outside of his home at sunrise the next day. With chilled hands he scattered feed for the chickens, dropped food scraps for the pigs, and fed the horse hay. He rubbed his eyes, which burned from a sleepless night. His body was numb, and he hadn't warmed back up since his search of the bay last night. He eyed the spade that hung up on the wall of his small barn. He considered grabbing it and starting the necessary work, but he was utterly disinterested in even the thought of labor. Instead, he drew in a deep, shaky breath, straightened his back, and marched to his front door. He hesitated a moment, and then opened the door. Warm air greeted him. His eyes adjusted to the gloom. and he saw the boy on his and Rebecca's bed. His small form was safely tucked under a heavy quilt. The boy's eyes were shut, and his pale teenage face stirred, and he spoke soft words. Crab mother. Must have been crab mother. Rebecca clutched the wooden cross around her neck with her left hand and held the boy's shoulder with her right. Lord, please forgive us and defend us from the demons. She'd wrapped Henry's head with a damp cloth. The boy seemed to be recovering from where she'd struck him with her broom. Henry would live. Jeremiah followed his wife's bloodshot eyes as she turned her unsteady gaze over to Theodore's bed. Jeremiah walked over dutifully to where his son lay. Theodore would not live. Jeremiah hadn't been able to find him in time. After paddling the skiff around like a madman, he and Todd were unable to locate Theodore. They only found him when the skiff's oar struck the submerged body. Both he and Todd had pulled Theodore's limp form out of the mud. Todd had cried and Jeremiah had gone numb, a numbness he still couldn't shake. Perhaps I'll be numb forever. He went over to Theodore's bed and sat beside his son. He and Rebecca had cleaned the mud off him, dressed him, and Rebecca had covered his body with a quilt, tucking him in like she had when he was 6 years old. She'd wept and prayed over Theodore's body through all hours of the night. Jeremiah had walked the sobbing Todd back to his parents late last night. After telling them what happened, Todd's parents had promised to inform Henry's parents of where he was and go fetch the priest at first light. Father Michaels would no doubt be along soon to pray with them and put Theodore to rest. Jeremiah still needed to dig a grave in the backyard, nail together a coffin, and fashion a cross. Yet he balked at the tasks. He wasn't sure he truly believed that Theodore was dead. It hadn't really sunk in that his son was truly gone. He touched Theodore's pale forehead. Despite the warmth of the fire, Theodore's skin was cold as ice. It was Crab Mother, Henry said. Jeremiah turned to Henry, whose eyes were still closed. He spoke as if in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Crab Mother, a giant horseshoe crab that pulled people down into the mud of Great Bay. That old wives' tale had been around when Jeremiah was a boy. Crab Mother, it was Crab Mother, Henry's incoherent mutterings began again. Rebecca's fist clutched her cross. Her eyes were closed, and she prayed, Protect us from the demons that seek to do us harm. Jeremiah looked at his lifeless son and whispered, Monsters and demons are the things we create to save us from the truth. Tears welled up in Jeremiah's eyes, because the truth is far more terrifying than any monster could ever be. And that's my short story. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hit like if you liked it. Subscribe, follow along, buy my books. They're on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everywhere online where books are sold. Taking on Water, and then the other book is called Redemption Grove. 2 thrillers, one set in New England and one set in Alaska. And that's it, guys. That's it for this one. Thanks for following, thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great fall.